we're going to continue talking about government financial reporting for Chapter 9. So some suggested interim reports that are, if you remember from the previous slide, if they're created times other than year end, they're called interim reports. So we can have a schedule of actual and budgeted revenue where we can check throughout the year where we are. Okay, so a schedule of actual and budgeted expenditures. Again, this we could do like a mid-year check or a quarterly check about where we are with our budget to actual expenses and what variations we have. If you remember from previous chapters, when we've had to do budget adjustments because of some budget to actual combinations, and then of course you remember that city governments and state governments are not allowed to operate at a deficit. And so they would have to close any deficit in their budget. So this is a good reason to regularly check your budget to actual and make sure you're on track. Okay, another one would be a comparative schedule of revenue and expenses for each one of our funds, a forecast of all cash positions, and a combined schedule of cash receipts, disbursements, and balances. Remember, these interim reports are just a good way to make sure that we're on top of all of our financial information, that our accounts are up to date, and that we're really paying attention to how financially responsible we are for our individual government and the citizens that live within it. Okay. Then we have our annual financial reports. So annual financial reports are used by the same people who might read interim reports. So we have the people within our government that are looking at them, so the management and the legislature within our government. We might owe money to creditors, and so we might have a current outstanding bond issue. We might be wanting to think about another bond issue. They're going to have interest in our financial statements. The state government or higher governments could have interest in our audited or annual financial reports. Our citizens might even be interested in looking at them. We've been looking at city financial reports for the last 6 weeks, and you can see how much information that they have in them and how a lot of citizens might not really pay attention to what's going on in their local government. Of course, debt rating agencies, so Fitch's, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, they are going to provide bond ratings for our governmental entities. They use the financial statements to help with those bond ratings, and then the news media might release statements or might have something to say about how a government is spending its money and what their priorities are. Okay, so we have our comprehensive annual financial report, or sometimes called a CAFR. Of course, we've seen throughout the last couple of weeks, as we've been looking at real CAFRs for city governments, that some don't follow the CAFR, some are CFAR, so the Comprehensive Financial Annual Report, but all governments, especially larger governments, prepare these CAFRs. We've been looking at like the City of Chicago, City of Minneapolis, CAFRs, and looking at their information. This is an annual report. It is prepared yearly and gets published as a matter of public record. You can often go to city websites and look at multiple years of information. The minimum information that we are required to put in this annual report is the management's discussion and analysis, the MD&A, This is exactly the same with corporate financial reporting. So we've talked about a lot of the comparison and then extreme differences between corporate accounting and governmental accounting. But this is one of the ways in which they are more similar than different. So that MD&A letter where the management signs off on the accuracy of the financial statements. Okay, then we're going to include any of our required government-wide and fund financial statements and any related notes. And then we have our required supplementary information. Okay, and we'll talk about each one of those different things. So with our financial statements, we have the governmental-wide statement of net position and statement of activities. Then we have fund financial statements for governmental funds, where we have one column of non-major funds and then extra columns for all of our major funds. We're going to report on our proprietary funds. And remember, the main difference of proprietary funds is that in addition to that statement of net position and statement of revenues, expenses, and changes, we're also going to include a statement of cash flows. And then any fiduciary funds. And with if we have component units, they are included with the fiduciary fund statement if they are fiduciary in nature. Okay, so we have, remember, our financial statements. We have any schedules and notes and explanations of those narratives. We have the statistical section that we've been taking information out. Oops. And then now we're going to talk about each one of those sections individually. Okay, so the first is the introductory section. So in the introductory section, we're going to have information that might be giving information about the city, upcoming plans, upcoming projects, a table of contents for the report, maybe a letter from the mayor or the city manager, and then anything else that management wants to highlight as part of that section. Then we're going to have our financial section, which has our auditor's report. That's going to be covered in Chapter 11, where we're going to talk about the auditor's report, the MD&A, the management statement, any required supplementary information, our budgetary comparison schedule, so remembering that we need to include the budget to actual statements in there, and any other financial statements that are required. The financial statements that are required really depend on the size of the government, the number of major and non-major funds that the government has, if the government has business type activities. Those things all factor into how many and what financial statements need to be included. Then the statistical section, so we have 10 years of data for each one of these, so financial trends information, revenues, expenditures, bond issues, what they use the money for, our revenue capacity information. So this is what's the ability to generate their own revenues, looking at property tax and any of those user charges for business type activities. Then we have our debt capacity information. So what is our current debt burden? What is our ability to issue additional debt? What is our current debt cap based on a percentage of our total property valuation, if you remember from Chapter 6? Then we would also have any information about debt limits, margins, pledged revenues, ratios of outstanding debt. Then we have demographic and economic information. So this is information about our citizenry. What is the age makeup? What is the racial and cultural makeup? What any socioeconomic information? What's the average person make in our community? What's the average household cost? What are the unemployment rates? How many employers do we have? Okay, and then general operating information. This information can also give notes or clarification to the financial statements, make it easier for the citizens to understand what is happening in the financial statements. Other things that should be included in operating information are the number of government employees, the capital asset information, and indicators of demand or level of service. So in our financial trends, we of course have the government's financial position has changed over time, focus on showing the trend in fund balances, and these are prepared at both the fund level and the government-wide level. The revenue capacity information tells about how much we can make, what is our ability to generate revenue. We have information on our property tax levy and any user fees that we generate revenue from. Debt capacity, as I said, any debt limitations, pledged revenues, what is our current debt burden, what's our ability to generate more debt, ratio of outstanding debt to personal income of our residents. We also look at it as part of total property valuation within our government. Okay, demographic and economic information, as I talked about, so information about our citizenship, who makes up our city. Our operating information, so as I said, our government's operations and the resources that are being used to operate our government. When we prepare the financial statements, one of the first things that we do is adjusting entries. The main adjusting entry that we need to do is to include depreciation on all of the government's assets, buildings, and equipment. Okay, then we're going to prepare a pre-closing trial balance that gives us all the information that we need for our financial statements, and then we have our closing entries. Again, where you can see that this list of information for preparing the financial statements is exactly the same as the corporate financing or business accounting, where we have adjusting entries and then a pre-closing trial balance, and then we close all temporary accounts and prepare our financial statements. The only difference here is this reclassification entries that are prepared and posted for our net position accounts. And so this is thing that we have to do for GASB, where we do a reclassification to what net position is, and we prepare a schedule for that. We are going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay, and we will continue talking about financial reporting in actually, I'm going to continue. I'm almost at 15 minutes, but I noticed that we only have 2 more slides, so I'm just going to keep going. Okay, then we have our fund financial statements. So all of our government funds and proprietary funds, we create a balance sheet and a statement of expenditures, revenues, and changes in fund balance. We have to classify according to their constraints and use. So if they're restricted, non-spendable, committed, assigned, or unassigned, and only the general fund can have positive unassigned fund balances. When we do our example, I'm going to take you from a trial balance through the required financial statements, and we're going to look at how we do that on a one-by-one basis. Okay, and then these reconciliations. So we have to reconcile the fund financial statements and the governmental activities column to look at what is reported in the net position account and anything that impacted the total, the change in net position. So what this reconciliation does is like, what's the fund balance, and then how do these activities affect the net position of governmental activities and the change in net position of governmental activities. In that example, in the example videos, I'm also going to do a reconciliation example for you in addition to financial statement. Okay, and then our last slide, so other financial reporting issues and topics. So we have financial reporting improvements that have been made. GASB is working on making improved reporting. We have the popular reporting, which is supported by the AGA, or the Association of Government Accounting. They have a student competition for popular reporting. They give a reward to popular reports, and then if you remember, you have a project due where you need to take a city government's annual report and turn it into popular reports. What a popular report is a 4-page report that gives a synopsis and easy to explain information that any citizen could read and understand about that city. There are 4 pages in a popular report. They're also called citizen-centric reports. They're supposed to be very easy to read, full of a lot of graphs and charts, some descriptions, very condensed summary financial information. Okay. Then we also have any special purpose frameworks for, because we've been looking at GAAP for state and local governments. However, many governments do not maintain internal accounting records on a GAAP basis or don't report using GAAP. And so they use what's called a special purpose framework, or called Other Comprehensive Basis of Accounting, the OCBOA. Okay, and then we also have international accounting standards can be used by governments and other public sector organizations around the world. As I said, most U.S. governments or city governments are using GASB reporting, but there is an international public sector accounting standards board for other governments around the world. Okay, and that is the end of Chapter 9. And we'll talk again when I'm going through how to do a reconciliation report and how to do the financial statements.